Erick Ho, co-founder of Function Network. Welcome to the show.
Hey Peter, thanks for having me.
So I want to begin with a spicy take that you shared on Twitter. This is back in July 21, 2024. You shared about your background and how you built excuse me, your first mobile app. You reverse engineered RuneScape. You created a RuneScape bot to kill Vorkath, the end game boss. Um, is that is that kind of where your love for uh, kind of tinkering with technology started?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you dig into my ex like that. And so for viewers, you're not familiar with like RuneScape, it's just a multiplayer video game. And just like with any other video game, you have to put in a lot of work to play the game. You can spend countless hours grinding. And so growing up, my little brothers and bigger brothers will make me play the video game for them to help train their characters. And that naturally led to one thing and another. I was like, how can I automate this, right? And so I kind of naturally went into the world of, how can I make the computer play the game for me? And many of you may know that as like, bots, right? Bots just automating tasks. It's funny that, because now these days in the modern world now, post AI, people are calling bots AI agents and AI agents bots. Um, but yeah, it was definitely kind of like an introduction to how I even got into computer science. Just because to truly build out a bot, you kind of have to understand the game mechanics. You have to understand how the game is written, and so that naturally led to a pathway of my career in reverse engineering, which is kind of like the process of taking the video game apart, breaking down the compiled code, which is kind of like the end code that's written, and then bringing it all the way up to what the actual source code looks like, so that way we can actually inject and actually automate these tasks. And so I got to the point where I created this bot that played the video game better than human players. And the nice thing about it is that generally, whenever playing video games, you get tired, you get fatigued, you start to mess up. A bot doesn't. A bot doesn't get tired, right? And so, we were running it at maximum efficiency. It was a really great time to, spend all my youth to just really understand everything end to end, and then kind of apply that to RuneScape. And so, yeah, that was a really fascinating experience for me. And I kind of see like the process of reverse engineering one of like the fundamental basis of how I see everything in the world today, right? Which is kind of like diving deeper, layer by layer, how things work, and the ability to dive deep and truly understand the process end to end is like super important to just any business problem, any technology problem, or really anything that you're really trying to problem solve.
No, that sounds really interesting. You were making quite a bit of money as a kid in high school too. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. And so, RuneScape is actually there's actually many people in crypto that
A
also has
ton.
a background in playing RuneScape or World of Warcraft, right?
Yeah,
And like
Vitalik, I
there's
think Vitalik credits a lot of it. I mean, he was very active in RuneScape.
definitely, I think he also played a lot of World of Warcraft too. I think like his
Yeah.
avatar in one point was like a moonkin or something. Um, and so yeah, I mean like inside all these video games, there's items, right? And so like these items can be sold for real money. It's called real world trading. Um, and so RuneScape has this currency called RuneScape Gold, which actually goes on the market for like 1 million RuneScape Gold might go for like 20 cents real dollar, right? And so you play the video game, earn gold, earn items, and sell them for real money. And so, there's this natural incentive for people, whether it's real players or, bots that can play and maximize the amount of gold that you earn, uh, to, make real money off it, right? And so that kind of like put on my entrepreneur hat. Well, originally I was building out bots so that way I could just trade my character, but can I scale this? And so what ended up happening was I was scaling it to pretty much the highest gold you could earn per hour on RuneScape across. It was, I believe, at peak, it was like 40 different accounts
That's
running and
amazing.
killing Vorkov. And, you know, we know that we were probably the best player on killing this monster because there's like the high scores that shows how many kills that you had, and we were on the top leaderboard. And so I was making anywhere from like $40 an hour, $60 an hour. But keep in mind, I was sleeping the entire time,
Yeah,
right? Because, you have the bots practically doing this all for you. And this is still relevant to, you know, what I'm doing today as well, right? Over at Function in like the post AI world,
right.
people often talk about, how do you automate your tasks? How can you have AI do everything for you? And I say that like bots was like literally a early iteration of what we see today with AI
Yeah.
agents.
Well, let's transition into that. So the headline on the function.network website says managed AI cloud. Experience bleeding edge generative AI models with limitless scalability, all powered by our distributed infrastructure. So tell us what does that mean, and who are you trying to reach with that headline and subheadline messaging?
What I'm trying to reach with that is a bunch of SEO, right?
Okay,
So usually I just pop up on a lot of search engines, and as well, now these days you also have GEO, right, which is generative
right.
optimization. And so a lot of fancy words, but we could definitely simplify it as well, right? Which is currently, if you're gonna go on function.network today, if you're a developer or you're looking to get access to open source models, generally what will happen is that you have two options, right? You can go out and buy some GPUs and then, take the open source model and host it on top of your infrastructure. So that's like the very degen or very DevOps way of doing things, which is you just try to own the entire stack yourself, right? Only problem with that is that as your application continues to scale, now you're kind of like left with managing the entire infrastructure yourself, right? And so that's not
Okay.
really scalable. And as well with infrastructure as a whole, I used to work at Amazon Web Services as well as a solutions architect. We focus a lot on scalable infrastructure, and I spoke to a lot of customers in the pre-seed to Series A range as well. Um, and it's very important that, if you have compute, you should utilize 100% of it, because any compute that is not used is effectively worthless or you're losing money on it, right? And so a lot of developers who are creating these AI agents, AI agent launch pads, they generally don't host their own infrastructure because they're not going to maximize it, right? And there is definitely a skill set to manage all these GPU servers and scale them as well, right? And so you kind of have the second option now, which is kind of using a managed service for it, right? And so Function
Yeah.
is one of the managed providers of open source models today. We currently operate that on a centralized fleet. And so we have a developer platform where you go get your API keys, create a workspace, and then get access to around 50 different open source models from Llama models, DeepSeek, Gwen, and you just use them to create
maybe
your application.
maybe let's back up a little bit. If we could articulate like the what is the problem that Erick Ho is trying to solve with Function Network, how would you answer that?
We're aligning the incentives, right? And so the developer platform is only one piece of it all, right?
Okay.
And so, whenever you build out a network, you got to keep in mind a network is an entire ecosystem. And so there's a lot of moving parts to it, actually, right? From the supply side all the way up to the demand side. And fundamentally, the problem statement that Function has currently right now is that we believe that open source model development is actually not sustainable today. And we actually fear that in the future, the existing open source models that we see today can actually go privatized, or we don't actually have very good open source models to use. That's
And,
inherently dangerous, right?
and why do you think it will be privatized?
Because effectively, just like with any company, right, you look at like who's currently making the open source models that people are currently using. Um, and so, OpenRouter is an aggregator of LLMs, and a lot of traffic flows through there right now. And so a lot of developers are using OpenRouter, and they actually publish metrics, right, on different developers that are using and going into specifics of like how often that model is being used, right? And 70% of the traffic is currently being routed to Meta, DeepSeek, Gwen, and these just a handful, literally only like five open source models, right?
Hmm.
And you look at like the funding and where that funding is coming from. Meta makes money from ads. They currently don't make any money from their AI product. They're currently using it for mind share and as well just capture and as much developers to use their models, right?
Hmm.
And the same with DeepSeek as well. They're a trading company fundamentally, right? And so they actually don't make that much money from their open source models. And so I think from a business perspective, this is always a question that every single business has to ask themselves, which is how do we convert this from a free product over to something that actually generates revenue, right? And so while it's free today, we see it time to time again. It's a classic playbook of subsidize it now, make money later, right? And so that naturally leads to, eventually, and we see this with some companies as well today, where they're trying to own the entire stack, right? OpenAI, for example, they originally started off as just a simple chat application, right? And then they released the API for developers. And now you look modern day today, they now have an application for you to code using their models. They have an application for you to generate videos using their models. And so naturally, a lot of companies are going to try to move towards trying to own the entire stack and less emphasis on the models that they're creating for the open world and open source community today.
So I guess help the audience understand like what is the problem? Maybe articulate it in like one or two clear sentences, and then let's get into how function network solves that problem.
Yeah, definitely. Open source models, like just in one or two sentences, right? Open source models aren't sustainable today, and we're aligning the incentives to do so. So function network is a protocol, AI protocol that aligns both developers, model creators, and as well compute providers to all work together to create this cohesive ecosystem for sustainable open source models, right? And how we do that is actually a pretty interesting approach, which is grabbed from analogies from both kind of like what we see in the crypto world today, where blockchain excels, and where the market is currently lacking.
Okay, take us through that. How crypto is helping those? What were the three areas of coordination? There's
Yeah.
the
So
model creators,
yeah,
and then
definitely, right?
there's yeah.
So you look at the existing landscape right now, there's like 1.8 million different models being published on Hugging Face, right? Which is just like a registry for models to be put
Uh-huh.
on, right?
Yeah.
Those model creators aren't making any money today, right? They just publish it for recognition to show that they have the state of the art model. But whenever you publish a model on Hugging Face, you don't make any money from that unless you are also the infrastructure provider or the compute provider, right? And you sell that access to developers. And
Got
so
it.
that's a
So the
huge
the
gap,
so the two entities, so the of the three that we need to coordinate,
right?
according to kind of your thesis, is there's the infrastructure provider, there's the model creators, and what was the third one that you said?
The actual developers, right? So you have the
The actual
developers,
developers.
the compute providers, and then the model creators.
Got it. And those three need to be coordinated, and you've created function network to help coordinate those three entities. Is that correct?
Correct. Exactly.
Okay.
And blockchain is great for coordination as well, right? So blockchain is great for coordination as well for instantaneous payments. Um,
Oh,
and so, let's just say that theoretically, in a Web 2 world, one day a model creator creates this really great state of the art model. And now they have to decide, how do I make money from this, right? You can either go try to create your own infrastructure platform and developer platform, right? And then host your own model and then sell that to developers and just create a traditional SaaS business. Or what you can do as well is do one-to-one enterprise licensing out to infrastructure providers, right? And so you would go through a lengthy process of legal review, solidifying the terms, and then as well going out to different infrastructure providers to host your model and getting a rev share through there. We actually think both options is not scalable because the people who are creating models on one end, they're really great at creating really good models. Fundamentally, they're AI researchers. They're not infrastructure experts. And we saw this time to time again, where a lot of companies kill their budget or their runway because they overspend on infrastructure because they don't realize how to efficiently provision and right size their infrastructure, right? And so they end up committing a lot on top of AWS, GCP, and just buy a lot of GPUs, right? On the second end, they do enterprise licensing. Well, that's a lot of legal work, and then as well, a lot of negotiation. The sales process for that is extremely not scalable. And so that's why we're proposing function for model creators, where you can effectively just digitize your open source model, basically digitizing the IP for your open source models, and publishing your model weights, where you can actually choose how much you want to take from what infrastructure providers are selling access for, right? And so it's effectively a royalty fee. Very similarly to NFTs, right? Whenever NFTs were created, there's generally a royalty fee that's attached to every single NFT. And every single time NFT is bought or sold, a portion of that flows down to the creator of the NFT. In similar fashion here, over in the AI space, we're applying a very similar concept where every time traffic comes to the model, a portion of that actually goes down to the model creator. And what this does is that it actually creates this natural incentive and natural funding that doesn't require deep VC funding for these model creators to continue innovating in a sustainable way to bring more models to Functions network, right? So that way they could easily sell more models. And so that's the model creator piece.
Got it. Tell me about the target customer for Function Network. You mentioned those three entities and how
Right.
you're using crypto to help coordinate all three. Um, what does your go-to-market look like, and who are you targeting at the very first as kind of your beachhead to start getting traction for Function Network?
For sure. On one end, it's the developers, right? And that's what we're currently focused on right now. We're currently
What
bringing,
type of developer? Maybe really articulate the type of developer that you're looking for.
yeah, for sure. So, anyone who's building, so it's any vertical, right? The AI can be applied to practically every single vertical. And what we're currently seeing within our developer platform and what's currently being developed is a lot of people who are building out AI agents, right? And so uh, the developers are building out AI agents. They always need access to some sort of model, right? And they're experimenting with different models that best fit their use case and, trial and error, right? They might start off with using the DeepSeek model, figure out that, oh, it doesn't actually perform up to my standards, and so they'll swap over to the Llama model. Or they'll use a mixture of models, right? And so that's one example of developers that are currently on a developer platform. And it's actually really important for us to continue growing that. We see a lot of opportunity for us to continue to bootstrap that demand that ultimately flow down to our actual network, right? And so we're currently growing the pie on that end. And it's going to start off with, agents, then you have launch pads, and then you have anyone who's building any vertical, might be building out a sales agent, might be building out a healthcare agent, customer care agent. And so those are kind of like, various different sets of builders are currently on our developer platform.
So let me ask a specific question on the agent side. I was talking with someone the other day, and they were building a very specific agent for a law firm. And so it was like hyper verticalized just for this specific law firm. And so they were they were labeling a bunch of data. They were digitizing a bunch of paper data and then labeling it and then feeding this model kind of legal information. Is that the type of agents you're talking about, like hyper verticalized, like by category or by industry or sector
We cater to all agents, right? But that's
to
just
cater?
we
Right.
cater to all
That's one
agents.
example.
That's one example of all agents that we cater to. And I don't see why we wouldn't want to cater to a super specialized vertical agent like a law firm agent. I think that's a
Yeah.
fantastic use case, right? But kind of like digging deeper into it. So is it like the law firm that's actually creating the AI agent, or is it like a consultant to the law firm?
It was a consultant to the law firm,
Right.
and the only users of this model, the user interface will be the customers of this interface are going to be the attorneys of the law firm.
Right.
And so it wasn't, it's not going to be productized and then commercialized. It's strictly for use for the specific law firm. And I actually see that kind of use case more and more. And I can see that for, all types of industries, where it's kind of like this private, non-commercial product that's used in-house, but it's like based on very hyper personalized models, like from the company itself.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I'm also seeing very similar trends, right, where people are building these AI agents basically for their business case. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that because
Yeah,
fundamentally, behind every single AI agent, there sits effectively a base model, right? And this base model dictates how intelligent your AI agent is, right? And so, you really think about it, as the base models get more intelligent, that actually helps increase the intelligence of every single AI agent, right? Um,
yeah,
while AI agents are still ingesting personalized data for any business, it still feeds down to kind of like the mother brain, right? But, you know, what if one day that mother brain is no longer available? That's a huge problem, right? Um, and so like, what if one day Meta's like, well, you know what? We have no longer interest of offering these llama models to you. You could either go through our API, or you could use our own law firm AI agent instead. Um,
right.
that inherently is kind of like the risk that we're effectively looking to mitigate through our protocol. Because then now we actually provide a sustainable path for model creators to truly thrive, create revenue, and then as well bring that back to the ecosystem. Um, I think, in general though, right, the AI agent space what I would say is still pretty early on. A lot of people are still experimenting around, trying out different AI agents, trying out different models that is powering the AI agents. And so there's a lot of opportunity for people to continue to experiment with all sorts of other models that can actually help amplify uh, their AI agent as well. And so we look at Hugging.
Maybe
Yeah,
no, maybe we can we kind of jump right into things, but maybe we can define some things first. Like maybe tell the audience, like when you say an AI model, maybe describe what that means. And then when you talk about an AI agent, maybe describe and define kind of what that means. And then and let's get into the crypto side of things. We talked about cryptos to helping to coordinate
right.
the infrastructure, model creators, and also the developers. But maybe tell us more about the crypto side too.
Yeah,
Anyway, go ahead.
yeah. So, for the audience here, right, an AI model you could just think of as like basically the brain of everything, right? And so AI models, practically power every single AI agent that you will hear today. So like, what's the difference between an AI model and then kind of like the difference between an AI model and an AI agent is that AI agents are a little bit more complex. They still use the AI model, but as well, they have additional more steps to introduce pre-processing, post-processing, and different interaction like personalized data, right? And so, you to build out an AI agent, you still need an AI model. They're not different; they go hand to hand with each other. Um, and then, going into like the crypto side. Sorry, I just want to make sure I got the question. It was it like basically where does crypto come into all of this with the network?
Yeah, before we get into that,
Right.
maybe I don't feel like we're fully defining what an AI model is. We're kind of throwing phrases around like Hugging Face and Llama 2,
Sure.
but maybe let's really define like this is a model. When Eric talks about a model or anyone talks about an AI model, this is like what he means. And then an AI agent kind of has very specific kind of definitions. Maybe we can talk about that. And then let's definitely get into the crypto stuff.
Yeah. Uh, you know, I think I touched on it a little bit already, but effectively, once again, like the AI model is like the brain, right? It's pretty generic. Um,
Yeah.
it doesn't really have context of what you're really trying to do. And I'll give you probably a deeper example.
Okay.
Have you ever asked ChatGPT like, something that you want to know about, but it didn't really give you the exact precise answer, right? Just because it didn't have enough context about the question that you was asking, right? And so generally you need to feed it more information, right? And that's effectively the AI model. It's like the base information resource, right? But even if you have like this large book of information, you still need something to help guide, you know, to guide and basically index all that information, right? And so, the AI model sits as the base layer. And so it's very generic, it's very broad, it's extremely generalized, right? And then because of that, introduce AI agents, which help you go a little bit more verticalized, right? And so that's why people mention, there's like sales AI agents, customer AI agents. These AI agents generally have a more specialized use case. And the way that they actually create these specialized use cases is that, generally speaking, the developers of these AI agents, they pre-fill the information to the AI so that way it has better context of what you're talking about, right? And so, a very similar fashion, whenever you're talking to ChatGPT, you try to provide as much information as you possibly can so that way the base model can respond better. AI agents effectively kind of like automate that process so that way you just get the right response that you're looking for or the right intelligence that you're looking for. And so, they both go hand to hand. They I think it's super important to also note that like AI agents are autonomous, right? They could kind of like work on their own. They act very similarly to a human. Those are the goals of building out a proper AI agent as well. And so like anything that you do as a human, AI agents are meant to replicate that and also be able to perform the duties of. And that naturally leads to the base model as well.
Yeah. Now, one of the issues, so if I could just, I guess, summarize. So a model is essentially how it's a machine. It's this mother brain that you've talked about, but it understands the world like we do, and it's able to categorize through taxonomies and language, and be able to kind of uh, make sense of kind of what's in the world through and with very specific context.
Right.
Now you can get into hyper specific context. Then you were talking about AI agents, and so some of the AI agents that we're seeing in the commercial space are like for customer service and operations and that type of thing. And these agents are autonomous and they can do things on the behalf of the human if we allow it to, with very specific kind of instructions and or boundaries about what they can and can't do. Um, Now tell us about the crypto stuff, because we're seeing a lot of intersection between AI and crypto, which I think is really quite exciting. And I think these AI agents, um, I mean, crypto is like perfectly suited for these AI agents so that they can start to transact in the world and also transact with each other using crypto.
Right.
Tell us, maybe come back to function network and how crypto is like how it works inside of the function network product.
Yeah. So like you're absolutely right. AI agents transacting using crypto is a pretty interesting use case, but in particularly for function, um, with the three different actors that I mentioned, the model creators, developers, and um, compute providers, they all need to be paid in some form of fashion, right? And that's where we see our Funk token being able to take a huge place into, because blockchain allows us to seamlessly coordinate that and as well pay people out in a way that doesn't require microtransaction fees. And then as well it's instantaneous, right? And so, when a developer uses our network, they have to pay for inference. And so they'll use our Funk token to pay for the inference. And then some of that revenue gets flowed down to the infrastructure of a provider in the Funk token, and they deserve to be paid because they're spending money on GPUs to host these models. And then likewise, a portion of that is also flowed down to the model creators, right? In the Funk token. And like, but why is this actually needed, right? If you try to do this with centralized providers today, if you actually go on Stripe.com terms and services, they actually prohibit crypto businesses, certain crypto businesses to transact, right? And as well, it's up to them to decide what is high risk businesses. And it's very similarly with a lot of other payment processors, right? And so that's one problem. It's very possible if you try to build out this business on centralized rails, the payment processor will just shut you down. And now you don't have a way to effectively coordinate and pay. And then the second part to it is that there's a significant amount of transaction fees. You hear it time to time again, which is at 2.9% plus 30% per transaction. That's not scalable in the future where we see this massive ecosystem of millions of developers, thousands or hundreds of thousands of computer providers, and thousands of millions of model creators all working together, right? That's significant amount of scale that doesn't scale within the existing realm of centralized providers today. And that's why blockchain is really great at coordinating all this through the payments and as well, through our Funk token.
Got it. Tell us about traction. How is Function Network doing in the last? How long have you guys been live?
So the network side, so actually, just take a step back. We decided that we wanted to build out a platform that people can use that feels like a centralized platform, right? And so we spent a lot of time building out this developer platform. And we currently have around 500 different developers currently building on it today. And in the last month, we just introduced billing. And so our inference using our endpoints was effectively free until very recently, right? And that we went live with that approximately 2 to 3 months ago, right? On the developer platform side, and then we only introduced billing very recently. On the flip side, that's kind of like the demand side, right? We're just bootstrapping the demand so that way we get more people to come and develop, don't give up the market share to other centralized providers, but ultimately our number one goal is to push that down to our network. And so on the network side, we've been building out a significant amount of smart contracts that's going to be deployed on base, right? And we've have finally achieved DevNet, and we're going with Testnet towards the end of June or the start of July. And so we're moving pretty great. I do believe this is the first DAI project deployed on L2 like base. And so I'm really excited to actually bring this network live, and it's all fully coordinated through the set of smart contracts that we wrote out.
Explain DAI. That's
Decentralized AI.
yeah.
So anything that deals
Got
with
it.
like, it's kind of like crypto XAI. Another word for it
Okay.
is decentralized AI.
Got it. Because that could be confused with DEI,
Yeah.
and which has a kind of a negative thing.
Yeah.
No, that's really interesting. What are your plans for Testnet, and how can and who's the target user for Testnet?
Our target users for Testnet are anyone from those three different actors, right? And it's all incentivized as well, right? So if you're a developer, you can actually come onto our network, use our open source models that we're currently hosting, and actually earn points for it. And so unlike using OpenAI and these other centralized provider, effectively you're being paid to actually use AI this time, right? Which is pretty interesting. And then you also have the infrastructure providers that have the H100s, 3090s, 4090s. They could all come onto our network as well. And then ultimately the model creators as well. And so it's an entirely incentivized testnet to really stress test our smart contracts and ensure that the technology that we build out really scales. And so I would love for anyone who, experiments around with AI to, have a lot of infrastructure and need to find ways to use it, or, if you're creating a really badass model, it'd be fantastic to have you on Funk's testnet.
Now, incentivizing those three entities or three stakeholders, especially on the infrastructure side, like I imagine that there's so much demand for the infrastructure that they provide. How is that going? I imagine that's probably a BD challenge.
I actually, maybe it's because also my lens of, being deep into infrastructure, but I would actually argue that infrastructure is actually very easy to incentivize. Infrastructure in itself is not a hard problem to attract. Um, to be honest with you, and this is kind of like a more hot take, I find that like infrastructure providers within crypto are more like mercenaries. They just generally try to farm as much of the token as possible or farm as much of the points as possible. And if it makes sense from a business point of view, then they will gladly participate into it, right? And so as long as
Yeah.
because you got to keep in mind, with a single GPU, there's a very good chance that they're not using 100% of the GPU. And so what if they slice like 30% of that and allocate it to Funk's testnet? Well, that's 30% that they were even going to earn from the first place, right? And so naturally speaking, we actually see an oversaturation of GPUs available. And we're quite confident
Interesting.
that we can actually get those GPUs onto our network without a problem. It's
Yeah.
oversupplied, if anything.
That's a good problem to
Yeah,
have.
definitely.
So on the for the stakeholders, like the is getting the model developers, is that the challenging part, or the developers to use those models?
The model developers and both the developers themselves, right?
Yeah.
Creating the AI agents, launchpads, etc. We're focusing on both on those ends significantly on the BD side, and so we have a pipeline, a sales pipeline built out on the model creator side and the actual developer side to help us win and make function significantly successful. But yeah, that's definitely where
Interesting.
our focus is for sure. And there's nothing wrong
Now,
with like, you kind of have to sometimes say it how it is, which is um, you want to incentivize the right actors into your network. It's extremely important, right? And so, for example, if you overpay the infrastructure providers and leave no room for the model creators, well, then you don't have the sustainable flywheel, right? And oftentimes we see a lot of emphasis on only the infrastructure side, but you also have to consider like, well, who's actually supplying to the infrastructure providers, right? What is the infrastructure providers hosting? Well, it's the model creators' work, right? And so you need all actors to be properly incentivized to truly make the flywheel work.
now, if you were to look at the AI kind of the AI cloud landscape, well, who are some competitors that that you look up to and respect and consider as formidable competitors?
Yeah, and this is a question that we get a lot because it honestly is a pretty, uh, let's just say, noisy space, right? A crowded space, and it's kind of hard to tell what people are doing in crypto and AI. And so you see a lot of GPU marketplaces, right? Give you some examples. You see on like the centralized side, you see Vast AI where you can just simply rent a GPU. And then on the decentralized side, you see things like Akash, Aether, etc., right? Um, they provide GPUs for you to access. We actually don't see GPU marketplaces as a competitor. We see them as basically a way to continue to scale function, right? Because we focus on hosting models particularly. Whenever you rent out a GPU server, you can do it you can use that for anything. You can use that for video editing, hosting podcasts, playing video games, etc. It's actually a different business. But sometimes when people just hear like AI and GPUs, they think they're the same thing, right?
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
just to be fully
I
clear, we're
I
not a
could
GPU
see.
marketplace.
Yeah, I could see you guys being in co-opetition with GPU marketplaces.
Exactly.
You could use them as you could be a customer of theirs.
Exactly. And it's super important, right?
Yeah.
It's actually a good thing because, like I said, there's literally an oversaturation of GPUs. And so there's a lot of GPUs on these marketplaces that are waiting to be activated, waiting to be used. And so a function can actually help increase the utilization. We could actually see in real time right now that there's a lot of GPUs on Lakash and Vasta AI that's waiting to be rented out. And so we're providing a way for them to actually do that in a sustainable way. In actual competitors, I think it's extremely early, like on the decentralized side, right? On the decentralized side, I feel like it's so early. There's not many products truly live, and so it's really hard to say right now on who's truly a competitor or not. On the centralized side, which is to be fair, we're like practically where everyone should be focused on, anyways, right? There's no point of PvP across two decentralized AI products whenever it's so early stage. On the centralized side, we see practically anyone who's building closed source providers, closed source models to these infrastructure providers that are hosting these open source model, but taking all the revenue for themselves. And so that goes into like OpenAI, Together.ai, Lambda Labs, these very large companies that are pretty much bringing in all the revenue and not passing it down to the model creators themselves.
Yeah. Now we see other projects kind of attacking the same, that have the same thesis as you do. That there's only a couple of big players that are kind of owning the AI space, and it's going to lead to a world that none of us are going to want. And so you have projects like Sentient from Sandeep and Polygon
Right.
and also others attacking this problem kind of in their own way. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. For like Sentiment, right? I'm not too fully informed. I know they have some pretty interesting technology with like model fingerprinting, if I recall correctly, which kind of
Yeah,
helps people understand who owns the model. But even Sentiment is trying to figure out where they position themselves in the market, to be honest with you, right? Um, and so like,
it's
yeah, it's
early.
extremely early. And it's like, whenever it's so early, isn't it our best time of use to actually just focus on ourselves and push towards, actually getting this out? Because, one thing that I really kind of like don't like in kind of like the crypto space is that there's too many theoreticals and too many early stage. And so how can you actually change that, right? I do think that we're moving to a place where people ask, where are the practical applications? Where's the practical networks? Where are the actual products within crypto as well? And so that's why we put heavy focus on actually building out these smart contracts, building out this DevNet, and being able to bring it over to actually testnet on a chain that you actually likely already use, right? And so we're not building
Yeah,
out our own L1. We're not trying to create another L1. We believe that like the existing technology on the blockchain side already exists for us to really use. And so, that's why everything is designed in terms of a set of smart contracts that we could deploy, right? And so, you know, our fundamental bet and kind of like how we differentiate ourselves, even in the DAI space, is that we ship. We actually send it over to testnet. We have people actually use it, and we start bootstrapping that right now. We tend to lean towards more pragmatic designs, right? And so, we really wanted to push for people to actually be able to touch, use, and feel function.
yeah. No, that's so from a developer's perspective, I could be building an AI agent on, let's say, Solana. But then I need the models hosted. I can have the models hosted on a function network and then transact uh, on the financial aspects of it on Base.
Yeah,
Like, would something like that work?
yeah, I don't see why not, right? Because it's access to the
Okay.
models, right? And actually, very
Yeah.
interesting. I do think there's this phenomenon that people generally have towards the end, like these AI agents, right? They try to use pre-processing and post-processing mechanisms to make their AI agent more intelligent, but it all fundamentally leans on that base model, right? But if the base model is not meeting their standards, they actually may lead into them trying to create their own model, right? Like a customized
Uh-huh.
model for what they're trying to use. And then once they create that
Yeah.
model, whether it's a fine-tuned model or a model made from scratch, they may want to monetize it, right? And so now they could take that model that they created or fine-tuned and bring that over to Funk Network and just monetize it directly on chain uh, permissionlessly. And so they don't need to ask us
Yeah.
permission to say, hey, I want to sell this model on your platform, right? You just go completely on chain, sign a couple of transactions, and finally they have this model that they're earning from and truly infrastructure providers that are actually hosting their model so that way developers can actually use it as well.
Let me ask this question around kind of model differentiation. So if everyone, as an infrastructure provider, Function Network provides base models to anyone that wants to use its network. And if everyone has access to these base models, like what differentiates the outcome or output of one model versus another, and how can these be kind of unique? Because if I have if I'm building a business and I'm
Right.
using one of the base models, but then someone else is using the same base model, like how can I compete against them if we're using the same base model? How do you differentiate?
Um, so from kind of like a developer side, right? If you have all access to the same model, how do you differentiate? I think that's kind of like what led to AI agents as a whole as well, right? We're kind of gonna go in a circle here because once again, this is extremely trial and error, right? And so I'm probably
Yeah.
going to tell you what I see in the industry today, which is um, people will try to use different models on the platform because people are trial and error in different models right now, right? And so you do have benchmarks that tell you like how well intelligent a model truly is, but generally that's not specific enough to really tell. And so you have like these developers, these businesses that are just trying various different models. And so they just might swap from
Hmm.
like Llama 3.3 to 3.1 or, 70B model over to a 7B model and just experiment around, right, with their use case. And so,
Could
yeah,
I could I take a base model like Llama
yeah.
3 and then maybe enhance it with, let's say, very specific healthcare data, but no one else has access to that except for me?
Yep, and that's what AI agents effectively are, right? They take that
Got
personalized
it.
data that they might feel like they have an edge on, and then try to feed that through the existing base model. Generally, that's what people call a RAG
Got it.
pipeline, right? They build out like this RAG pipeline, which just basically allows you to take a lot of information and use that to feed over to the base model so that way they understand it, right? And so,
And can you define RAG
yeah,
just so the audience is
uh,
aware?
I don't know the actual. I think retrieval augmentation generation, but actually
Uh-huh.
I don't know. It's a super fancy word for basically a database that helps you index information, right? I always found like the terminology
Yeah.
behind RAG. There's a super fancy scientific name for it, but basically it's just a simple database that helps you index information, right? And-
Yeah, it's so retrieval
I think
augmented
it's like
generation. It's a way to
right,
enhance a model or augment a
right.
model. And so in that example where there's a base model like Llama 3.1, but then we augment it with customer service data from my call center.
Yeah, and it's actually pretty effective,
Got
right?
it.
And that can help you build out an edge. And ultimately, that's what kind of like defines what an AI agent is. And so a base model can only get you so far. And then you just naturally lean
Yeah.
into like different technology, whether it's like using RAG or creating your own fine-tuned model. These are all potential edges or like, potential ways to differentiate yourselves in the market. I don't think anyone has necessarily figured it out. And so that's probably why you see like why all these people, all these businesses also have different like selections of models. Have you ever
Yeah.
realized that like whenever you use ChatGPT, they don't necessarily have you, they don't automatically detect which model you should use, right? They still provide a choice for you to select different model instead of trying to automatically detect it. It's because it's still
Yep.
extremely early, right? People are still trying to figure out what is the best way to get the information to the actual users and developers. And so there's a lot of trial and
Yeah.
error right now.
So Eric, this has been a really, really good conversation. I've learned a lot. Maybe a couple last rapid fire questions before we end. What's one crypto idea that you think is overrated?
Oh, that's a pretty interesting question. Um, Overrated. Um, like maybe go into that a little bit more if you don't mind. Like overrated as in like oversaturated or just like it just doesn't work.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
here's maybe a real a specific one. So you said in a tweet, the obsession with modular is starting to resemble Web2 microservices over abstracted, under coordinated. And so that's what kind of led me to think maybe he thinks the modular thesis is maybe overrated.
Yeah. I don't even remember tweeting. It might have been my AI agent. um,
Okay.
that's hilarious.
All right.
But you know, this I think one that's maybe a little bit overrated is probably building out your own L1 right now. Uh, I
Okay.
do believe that there's extremely lack of applications within the blockchain space, and so
Agree.
there's so many more L1s. But as you introduce more L1s, you actually introduce more fragmentation, right?
And which is a really big
Yeah.
problem, especially on the Ethereum side, right?
And so, like, and
Yeah.
most of these L1s and L2s don't really have a differentiator, to be honest with you, right? They might have one additional feature add, um, but then if you really have to carve out your own L1 or L2 for that, then you kind of get into a
Yeah.
space of where you just basically added a feature for basically the trade-off is that you don't have that many users and you're bootstrapping the users again over and over, and that is a very time-consuming process, right? Um,
It's fatiguing
yeah,
is what it is. It's the consumer, the user is fatigued. Okay, one last question. And that you can answer either in the AI space or crypto space, but who's like one builder or person that you admire? And even if you disagree with them, and and tell us why you admire that person.
on the crypto builder side, ah,
Or
yeah,
AI.
on
Either
the
one.
AI side or the crypto builder side. Um, I've been digging Peter. So there's this partner from 1KX. I believe he goes like Peter Pan. He's a partner,
Peter
right?
Pan.
I
Yeah.
actually just like really like his takes. I wouldn't argue that like he's a builder per se, but he definitely has the right takes when it comes to like the existing landscape of crypto, right?
Yeah.
I believe he leads like consumer application investments, right? And so, like,
Yep.
probably going back to the first question as well, I've been really digging his takes. I really got to respect it because he understands, like, you know, we just need so much more demand into blockchain before we go into all these, like, scalability issues and potential scalability issues. So, yeah.
Yeah. Now I've got a funny story about Peter Pan. He and I first met back in 2017, I believe, at ETH San Francisco. And he's done really well for himself since then, but he's great. No, I love his takes on Twitter for
Yeah.
sure. Well, Erick, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I'll be sure to share in the show notes about Function Network, your Twitter handle, so that developers and builders can get involved.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Peter. Pleasure to be part of Block by
You bet.
Block. Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.